Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Tonight, we have with us two amazing writers. One is my co-host, Steve Flink, and the other is Chris Clarey, who, after covering tennis mostly for the New York Times for over 3 decades, has just released his first book called The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. Super excited to have Chris join Steve and I for this discussion. So with that, please welcome to the pod, Chris Clarey. Chris, thank you so much for talking your tennis journey and more specifically talking about your book on Roger. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, this is a great pleasure. Good company here. I'm looking forward to this.
So first, tell us where you're at. I know I believe you're in Paris as we speak right now. Is this still kind of the book tour time of year for you?
Well, actually, my life has been split in a lot of ways between Paris and the U.S. for a long time. My wife is French. She's from here. And I was the International Herald Tribune sports columnist for many, many years. And that the International Herald Tribune was based in Paris. And basically it's the International New York Times. So I really worked in and out of here for 3 decades. I lived in Spain for a long time too. But so we're back here. My wife's taking some classes. I wanted to come back over for the ATP finals in Turin when they made the move from London to Turin. So I was just there and did a lot of book stuff in Italy, which was fun. The book just came out in Italian. Il Maestro, which is great, I sort of figured that was kind of fun. And there was a fair bit of interest in Italy, but I was struck by how many tennis books there are in Italy. I was at the bookstores there, and I was amazed by how much interest there was in the sport right now and how crowded the bookshelves were with tennis books, because as Steve and I know, there aren't that many in our country really that come out on a regular basis. So over there were a bunch of Federer books and a bunch of books about, I think Riccardo Piatti seems to have cornered the market on all the books, the coach over there. So it was interesting. But I've been doing a lot of book stuff for the last few months, and now I'm here and I'm finishing up the year before coming back for the Australian Open.
Nice. This is I'm fascinated, and we're going to get into all this because you've covered tennis for so long, but this was your first experience writing a book, and I'll ask Steve to piggyback a little bit because of Steve's prior experiences with his book writing. For you, how long did this project take from, I'd say, first word on paper to actually seeing it in final book form?
Full disclosure quickly, I did write 3 Davis Cup books back in the day, back in the 90s, that I took very seriously, but nobody else did. But they were for me a big deal. They were kind of the yearbook of the year. I interviewed everybody and came out in a hardback form. It was with Rizzoli, and I think it was with the ITF at that point, actually. So okay. There actually are books that I wrote them. But to be honest, compared to this project, it was kind of like sort of jotting down a few notes versus trying to write something much more in depth. There's nothing really to compare it to. So this book, in my eyes, was really my first book, like you say, first real major book. And it was just much harder than I imagined, to be honest with you. And the process of doing it, really in theory, began 20 years ago when I first saw Roger Federer play, really, or 22 years ago, 1999 at the French Open. I was pretty instantly fascinated by him. And the book dates back to that period in terms of the interviews and the research that was done. But the actual process of doing it, I basically decided after 2019, it just seemed to me that Roger's career, the main body of work, was finished by then. You could tell the interest was really huge in him around the world. I could sense that from all my traveling. And I really felt like he's going to do his autobiography at some point. I could never be part of that. It felt to me like this was a really good time to look at his career and give people a sense of what I had seen from being kind of in a ringside seat all these years, from watching Roger as a pro anyway, really develop in the beginning, and then having been around an awful lot, Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal as well. So I kind of saw it as a book that would be about Roger, and he would be the thread, but there'd be a lot of big 3 in the book and really explore the rivalries. And I just felt like I would really regret it if I didn't do it. So that was kind of the genesis. And actually the actual process was about 6 months of research dedicated exclusively to the book. When my day job wasn't going on, it was in my free time. And then I took a 5-month book leave from the New York Times, which was great of them to do. And I was, full in. I think I took a couple of days off in 5 months and just really did it. So it was what a hard thing, but what a rewarding thing. And I'm really glad to have kind of exercised myself, if you will, of the book, and I've managed to get it done, which is great.
Yeah, I want to lead, and Steve's going to follow me with this, but yeah, you said you had, a little bit previous experience in writing a book, but this was really your first major project, all in on Roger. Was there something that you learned during this process that was something unique or more challenging, as opposed to, just writing columns, which you've done for so long and you're so good at for the New York Times?
Well, thank you for that. I mean, it's a different ball game. It really is. And I think I was surprised by how different a ball game it was, to be honest. I think my takeaway, and if I ever do another one, which I would hope to do at some point, is that structure is king, really. In a newspaper article, obviously it's important. Your structure is important in anything you do in writing, but you can kind of get in and get out, and your body can be whatever comes up during the course of your day and your research, and you're going to be okay. Book, long form, if your structure is not good, it's going to fall over. You're going to lose your momentum. You're going to lose the rhythm, at least in my experience in this time. So I think you cannot really overdo the structural planning, if you will, the architectural drawings of the book. And then I think if you do a good job of that, a really good job of that, then I think things are a lot more flowing and natural. I had to make some corrections along the way, but I really have respect for those who can put together a finely tuned architectural process on the book. And I think it's not as, I thought in a way when I started to do it, that it would be a series of magazine articles, if you will, to write a book. I think it can be that, but I think a book that has that sort of integrity and structure, it isn't that. It's got a unity and a thread all the way through. And to carry that all along was a real challenge for me from my background, for sure.
And Steve, I'll ask you, I mean, you've written a number of books. You also written thousands of articles. I guess maybe what are some of the things that when you first started writing your first book kind of struck you as well? This is something unique. And maybe has that changed over the course of your career in writing your several books?
Well, it was interesting to hear Chris describe the process as he saw it. And I found that very, very interesting, because when I did my first couple of books on the greatest matches of the 20th century and then the greatest matches of all time, I felt I was able to successfully turn it into it. That was more like magazine pieces, Chris, threading them together. And because in the case of the greatest matches, somebody could actually start in that book and go to Little Mo Connolly and then go back to Tilden and then jump forward to Monica Seles, and it wouldn't have mattered. But I found that when I did the Pete Sampras book, it was more, I had this more of a philosophy along the lines of Chris, that this has got to this cannot be, this structure has to be very different. And I hope I succeed in the end. I felt in that case, I tried to just describe the breadth and scope of his career from beginning to end, with lots of quotes mixed in from other players and coaches. But then to have a section in the back, there was so much material that I'd gotten from the interviews, that I wanted to use that in the end and give the reader maybe a little dessert after the main course. So I did that chapter on imagining Sampras playing against Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer, and I did his legacy, and then I did sort of his life today. So but where I'm totally in accord with you, Chris, is that the challenge is just so much more substantial than doing the shorter pieces, and the structure is indeed critical.
And both what you both referred to is the subject matter of the book makes it what it is, right? Steve, the first two books that you referred to, you could be like short snippets, short stories. Like you said, you can go to whatever match you really want to read first and then go out of order, versus with Pete or with an autobiography, you want that kind of beginning, middle, and end type of piece. So I think you both hit on that and made that really, really clear. You guys both did amazing jobs on your projects.
Well,
one thing I would say, it's interesting from what Steve had to say, is that in a way the challenge with both Pete and I would imagine, and with Roger for sure, was that there's just so much material, so much to marshal. Roger's done thousands of interviews in multiple languages. I've done over 20 with him over the years, which is really the basis of the book. And so many matches and so many people talking about Roger over the years. So that was also a huge challenge, was just to marshal the information, figure out, you didn't want it to become, I wanted his voice to be a big part of it. And that was important to me because I had that access and I had those conversations. So I wanted to be able to bring that out. But if it just became that, I think it would have lost. You needed more interpretation, and you needed to really have a very discerning eye. Maybe my eye wasn't discerning enough at times, but to be able to leave a lot on the cutting room floor, and making those cuts and making those decisions took up a lot of time and a lot of headspace.
Yeah. And tough decisions. Go ahead, Steve.
Just quick interjection. His eye was very discerning, as someone who read the book very carefully. And I think that's what made the Federer books so so compelling for the readers was that there was some really excellent interpretation. And it went beyond Chris's interviews with Roger. It went to his own view of the game and of the man himself. And I think that was a crucial part of the book.
The other crucial part was Steve Flink catching 20 errors in his read of my book, which was very helpful.
Chris, every time I send him an email, I get nervous before I hit the send button, Chris, you know.
I can't thank him enough. I'm going to keep doing it. It was great. And I said, thank you, Steve, just in time.
Chris, you hit on something that I'm so glad you did. And you haven't even seen the outline where I want to go, but you said, he does interviews. Roger does interviews in 5 different languages. I want to talk a little bit about Roger always being on, both on the court and off the court. And the amount of energy that is needed for all of his obligations is completely mind-boggling to me. And I'm talking off the court. A lot of the general public just sees what he does. He works really hard on, during match time. But my gosh, after matches, he does press in, like you said, 5 different languages. He's got all these public appearances promoting the events. I saw it firsthand on Laver Cup a few years back when it was in Chicago. The amount of energy that is needed, and he's always on. It's something that I think few people have that ability to do. And it takes so much energy, and we're not even talking about success on the court. Can you talk a little bit about that in all your interactions with Roger?
Well, one thing comes to mind when you talk about all that, and that was one of our last real lengthy interviews that we did was in 2019. It was in Switzerland. We went to lunch after a clay court practice session up in the Alps near his house in Lenzerheide. And we were talking about this very topic. I mean, how did he find a way to juggle it all, and what was sort of the secret to his longevity and his seeming delight in longevity? He just seemed like he had the very bearable lightness of being, if you will, for a long time. And I feel like one thing he kept doing was this. He would hold up his fist in the interview and talk about the clenched fist and how important it was to do this. You had to clench, but then you had to unclench. And he felt like many players over time had not done a good job of finding enough time to do that. And what he meant by that was you're on the circuit, you're fully committed, but you got to find a way to break away from the competitive training match rhythm and breathe and relax and change your chip, if you will. And I think he applies that. I think it's learned behavior. I think it took him a long time to get there, but I think he really did get there. And I think that's been the key for him with his personality type and with his multiple commitments and his big ambitions. I mean, he seems like a great guy, and he is, I think. And he's somebody who has big expectations of himself. He's had to learn how to manage. But I think he can seem extremely cool when you're just face to face with him and sort of relaxed and in repose and like a guy you could have a beer with, and you can. But there's a lot of thought that goes into creating that mood and that ability with him. It's very intentional. And I think the fist and all that, whether he and his wife Mirka came to that conclusion together, whether he came to it himself, I don't know, but it's been a huge part of the process. And I think his compartmentalization, which he plans for, and which is very important to him, he knows he's got an internal thermometer barometer inside that tells him when he needs that relaxation time and he needs to break away. And I think it's allowed him to really give his utmost in all these different domains of the tennis requires.
It's incredible. It really is. How much he has to give, not just being on the court, trying to win matches and being the very best, arguably the greatest of all time. I want to talk next about with your interaction with just not Roger, but with also Rafa and Novak. There's the public view that there's so much love towards Roger and Rafa, and then there's maybe hatred towards Novak, or there's so much love to Novak and there's hatred toward Roger and Rafa. I think that's changing, gladly, because these 3 guys all have, their great strengths. We saw it change in New York. I think it probably took a little bit too long to get to New York to have that happen with Novak. But talk about what your view is and what your sense is while you have so much love to the Roger and Rafa group and versus the contrast of, oh no, not Novak. And again, I'm glad that seems to be changing over time here.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what Steve has to say after I finish about sort of Connors, McEnroe, Borg, Lendl in that period, because I think there are some parallels that I could see, but he lived it more than I did. My sense of it all is there's partly a timing issue involved, and that is that, basically Novak broke up the lives of the party in some ways and came along, and also a narrative structure that everybody was pretty comfortable with, was well established, with Rafa and Roger going at each other with stylistic differences and a little bit of an age gap, and also a very refreshingly collegial vibe, I think, in a lot of ways. Of course, there was some edge to their rivalry. I mean, Roger complaining about Tony Nadal's coaching, that was real, and I know Roger did not love having his moment of dominance interrupted by Rafa's arrival, and it happened pretty quickly, faster than people remember, I think, in a lot of ways. But they came to a pretty nice entente cordiale relatively quickly, and I think there was a lot of appreciation for that vibe. And Novak emerged basically in 2007, 2008, so a long time ago, in this dynamic, and that was sort of at peak interest at that stage in Roger and Rafa. There was a huge amount of interest in that. So Novak was kind of almost inconvenient in terms of how that all played out. And I think those tribes of support were pretty well established, and Novak kind of just disrupted it all. So, and I think he came in also with I found it refreshing as a journalist, his sort of comedic talents and his own linguistic set of talents that he had. And he's got a very strong personality, Novak. And his game is also a bit of a contrast to Rogers and Rafa's too, the way he plays the game. So I think all that was kind of cool to see. But again, I think he was perceived as somebody who was a little disrespectful compared to the vibe that was in place at that time. And he was sort of, I think, openly ambitious in a way that Roger and Rafa had sort of played down, by Roger sort of playing it cool and being smooth, and Rafa always singing Roger's praises almost to I think overdoing it at times. So I think in some ways Novak came out, in a way, was being very real, but I think that dynamic also created an impression. And one thing I've learned over the years in tennis is it's hard once you create a certain vibe and a certain impression to shake it. Not easy to do, because people get a real deeply embedded sort of view of who you are, and to change that momentum can take a lot. And it can be done for sure. You look at Navratilova, and Steve can speak to this, or people like I'd say Andre especially is a great example, Agassi, of that, how things can change over time, but it takes time. And I think, along Novak and Roger and Rafa have had, by historical standards, I think a very collegial and nice environment. You compare to some of the rivalries of the past, Visa's downright sweet. But I think compared to what Roger and Rafa had established, it was a change. And I just think there's been a lack of forgiveness and acceptance still in a lot of people's parts of his role. And frankly, he's taken over the last decade in a lot of ways. Steve,
I'll let you add to that. That's great insight. Thanks, Chris.
It was great insight. No, first, Chris brought up the Connors, McEnroe, Lendl, Borg era, and of course Borg was out of the picture first. But what struck me when Chris brought that up is, in that era, David, the Connors and McEnroe were sort of the outlaws, and they were the bad boys of tennis, and they kind of detested each other. But interestingly enough, they ganged up in a sense on Lendl. Here was this earnest craftsman who just went out there and did his job, caused no trouble, not colorful, but not popular, especially with the American public, and very dour. And they proceeded to really sort of ambush him verbally in a way at times that I thought was a bit unfair. There's where I see a parallel. Novak's a totally different personality, Chris, obviously from Ivan Lendl, but the similarity to me is that both Lendl and Djokovic were worthy of more admiration. And the other thing that strikes me about Chris bringing up Agassi is the public perception of Agassi did change radically over the years, from the swashbuckling young kid who came along with the long hair and the colorful outfits to what he became in the 90s, when he sort of rearranged his priorities. So I find all those things interesting, but I really am largely in accord with Chris about what in his analysis of the big three now and how that is all played out. And I just wonder, David, will the next step be, if Djokovic does pass them and breaks the tie and goes on and establishes himself in the eyes of many as the greatest player of all time, whether that the public perception may find, I mean, yes, it was a turning point emotionally for what happened with the crowd at the US Open, but will we see more of that down the road? I mean, Chris, it was interesting to watch Djokovic playing watching him in the Davis Cup, and he's being interviewed after, tell me if I'm pronouncing this right, after they played Kazakhstan. Have I got that right?
As far as I know, my Kazakh needs work, but yeah, I got you.
Okay. I'm going to call it Kazakhstan, but he's done the interview, David. They do the courtside interview. The interviewers have their masks on and they're standing there in the very formal setting, obviously, and quick. And he and his teammate did their brief interviews, and it had totally broken up. And they were starting to leave the court, and Djokovic stopped them from leaving, got them to come back. And he said, I just want to say that I want to congratulate Kazakhstan on reaching the quarterfinals, and also on your fans. You have terrific fans, or something to that effect. And I thought, I wish people would talk more about that side of him, because yes, he'll get criticized for smashing the rackets, but in essence, he's really a superior sportsman. And that moment of bringing up Kazakhstan, going out of his way to laud their fans and acknowledge their players, I thought was a very prevalent side of him.
Well said.
I honestly can't think. I mean, Steve, I can't think of a time when he was a poor loser. I really can't. I mean, there may be occasions I'm missing. I know there's been times during matches I didn't think he was doing a great job of handling the flow of the match sometimes, and his breaks, I agree, have sometimes been ill-timed. I know I'm sure he has a good defense for that, but there's been quite a lot, especially earlier in his career, when he would leave the court or break up the rhythm of the match. But as far as when the deal is done, he's shown a lot of magnanimous behavior and a lot of eloquent words over the years. I would agree.
Yeah, class of his own when it comes to that. It's not that Roger and Rafa are bad losers, but Novak is just extraordinary. And I mean, the moment I remember most, Chris, I don't know if you were at the 2015 French Open, but he loses to Stan Wawrinka in the final after beating Rafa in the quarters. Everybody thought it was going to be Novak's title, and he hadn't won the tournament yet. He won his first title the next year. And he went so far out of his way and genuinely to hug Stan, to talk to Stan at the net, to greet him a few more times before the presentation. I just thought it was remarkable, because he was obviously hurting deeply. He thought he might finally have his breakthrough there, and he loses to Stan, but he got completely outside of himself and put himself in Stan's shoes, and it was remarkable sportsmanship.
Yeah, I was there, and there's actually a footage of film that was shot that year, documentary film by the French Tennis Federation, which you probably have seen. It was basically an analysis of the whole tournament, and there's a footage of Novak just sitting there staring into space in his chair after that defeat. And you can just see what it meant to lose that match, and what you're describing, the ability to kind of get outside himself and reach out to the man who won the match. And he's done that before. You could even see it in the match in Turin when he lost there. He was able to reach out and overcome the disappointment and do what needed to be done.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Steve.
Interesting, David. Just a brief point that Chris in his book does a nice job of sort of giving you a true sense of Roger and his many great qualities and a few of the minor flaws. And one of the things you did bring out, Chris, that I liked that you did, because I thought it was an important moment, was the low point for Roger being the 2011 US Open. Was the second year in a row that he'd had two match points in each case against Novak, and both matches got away. Great comebacks from Novak, just as similar to 2019 Wimbledon, when Djokovic saved 2 more match points and won that final. But Roger came in maybe perhaps a little too soon, who's to say, and he really was not gracious in that press conference, and talked about how he described one of the match points as reminding of Novak when he hit that black forehand return winner cross court, that was just stunning. As it reminded him of his days in the juniors when guys would slap balls around and somehow they go in. So there was a certain bitter edge to him that day. And I was glad you brought that out, just because there is a sense sometimes among fans, he's so revered, and deservedly so, that he walks on water and he can do no wrong. And I think it was important that side of him be brought out, because certainly you were more than fair at talking about his gracious and elegant qualities. But I thought that was important that you mentioned that. Tell me about your thoughts in bringing that into the book.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve. I mean, he's no saint. None of us are. And it's important when you write a book of this length and this depth that you try to show the whole person, and don't try to create, do any myth making involved with a kind of a project. You know that from your Pete book as well. So I felt like I've been around Roger in a public context quite a long time. I've been really, truly impressed by the way he's conducted himself in general. He's had a lot of opportunities to screw up. He really has. 20 years of exposure to all people like us and to all these different settings and different cultural expectations. And he's really navigated it very graciously. But there have been moments when the competitive nature comes out, and I think also that little boy who had a hard time accepting defeat and understanding it, and really being able to find a way to cope with it emotionally. It's rare, but it does still come out on occasions still, and it has over his later career. And I think it just shows you too, as a book I hope displays, how far he's come in a lot of ways too, that he's had to try to conquer these things. In a lot of ways, the Roger Federer that we see on the court is playing against type in a lot of ways for him. He is a much more volcanic by nature than he shows to people. And I think
you'd never know it. You'd never know it, Chris.
It's been a real act of will. But I think at times like that, and they're rare, I think when he feels like maybe an injustice has been done, and maybe his code of the way tennis should be played was broken that day. By the way, Novak won those points. He hadn't really worked for them the way that Novak usually works for points. It wasn't the normal dynamic. And he reacted in a wounded way, because I think the best players know who makes them uncomfortable. They know it. They never forget it. They try to hide it and don't tell you, but they know. And Novak from an early stage, just like Rafa, made Roger uncomfortable on the court.
Incredible insight by both of you guys. I appreciate it. I think it goes to saying, even though we don't think people, the big three, as great as they are human, they are in fact human, and they have their strengths, and they also have some flaws as well. So thank you for that. I want to now ask the $1 million question, because you said, as far as timing of the book, you felt it was right. It was after the 2019 season when you got so close in that Wimbledon final. The $1 million question is what's next? How is this going to end for Roger? And I don't even know if Roger knows right now, right, as the date of this recording. We do know at the date of this recording that he's going to be surprised if he'll even be ready by Wimbledon in 2022. In your conversations with him, any hint on where this goes? Do you think he'll try to complete 2022? Do you think 2023 is out of reach for him? I guess I'll finish with, I think we all appreciate his love for the sport, and he will still remain involved in the sport. We know Laver Cup, I mean, that's his baby. He's going to be involved in that some way, shape, or form, but you don't see him exiting the sport, and we're not hearing from him once he decides to retire, right?
Yeah, I haven't talked to him in depth for a while now, so my insight into where he's at right now would be limited to what I think and what I've my supposition of based on past experiences and what I can see. I think Roger is by nature an optimistic person who really thrives on positive energy. I don't think he likes to get bogged down in negative thoughts. And for whatever reason, I am frankly a little bit surprised. He seems like he really matters to him to try to come back and have a better go of it than he had this last run in 2021, where he was clearly hampered by the knee and the 6-love loss of the set to Hurkacz at Wimbledon in the quarters. Not the way I'm sure he envisioned playing his last Wimbledon match, or possibly even his last match. That's not what he wants to go out with. And I think he's using the rehabilitation process on this latest knee surgery, which I think is much more significant, as motivation. And he knows that he wants to have an active life with his 4 kids, especially his 2 young sons who are, still quite young now, and be able to do all the things he's been wanting to do for a while, which is ski with his family and his friends and play pickup soccer and do all those things. So I know he's using this rehabilitation process. He wants to be extra motivated and do it right, so he has a future that he can look forward to in terms of physicality and all that. But I personally think it's going to be extremely difficult for him to get the kind of big bang result to finish that he may be looking for. And he said in his most recent interview with a Swiss journalist that he was doing this for the fans in a lot of ways. I don't think he should be doing it for the fans at this point. I think he's given the fans everything that they need. They have gotten their full dose of great Roger across the scope. I'm sure they'd be delighted to have him come back and play some more, and especially win some more. But I think he needs to be doing this for himself. If he feels like he needs a satisfaction himself, deep inside himself, to play better tennis, pain-free tennis, perhaps, some more in his career to get what he needs, more power to him. I mean, he's earned whatever finish he wants to go for. But I don't think he's going to get that big bang, hold up the trophy, beat the young Lions one after the next and walk off with the Wimbledon in his rearview mirror. I just don't see it happening at 40, 41 years old. But it sure seems like he wants to come back and play some more. And knowing him and the energy he can put into things and that will that's inside of him and that positive energy, I wouldn't put it past him. But I don't see the Hollywood walk-off moment.
Steve, I think you're in agreement with him, but I'll let you, I'll give you the opportunity to add to that.
No, there's not much that is, it's very good analysis and perspective. I would say that, we've talked about it, David and I, a few times, Chris, and I just feel like if he runs into the same syndrome, Roger, as he did in 2021, and he's having to stop and start again, I just can't imagine that it's going to be worth it to him at that point. All in the quest to end it more on his own terms, to have to be so disrupted again. I think the only way it works is if he makes that comeback in the summer and he's able to play continuously through the end of the year and he's not in a lot of pain and he's getting reasonably good results, and then maybe he does play on into 2023. But it's such a tall task. He's going to be 41 by the time that comeback happens, apparently, according to the way he looks at the scenario. And that's asking a lot of himself. I totally do agree with Chris that it should be more about what Federer wants for himself, what his own desires are, and the fans would be perfectly understanding. They've been more than rewarded across the years by Roger Federer. Yeah,
100% agree with both of you. Chris, you want to add?
Well, the thing I would say too is I think through my lens, people might say Roger can't let go. He's coming back because he just can't let go and he can't accept that the sport would move on without him. I don't buy that.
I don't buy that.
But I have heard that, and it's sort of a sign of hanging on to that last, thread of relevance in the game. To me, I think it's just a sign of how much he truly enjoys the process of playing, and also how much he just enjoys the whole environment of tennis because of that clenched, unclenched fist philosophy that he's had and the ability he's had to really kind of solve the riddle of how to thrive and survive in the Shark Tank of competitive tennis. He really has. And I think he really enjoys the way it's set up for him. And it's a true pleasure. And I think he really will miss it. I think he'll move on, but I think he'll miss it. So I think part of this, what we're seeing, this desire to keep going beyond what might seem logical, is also coming from very positive emotions too.
Yeah. The only thing I would add, just my own personal opinion, people are saying, oh, he doesn't want to go out. And let's say he never plays professionally again. And let's hope I'm wrong on this, but let's say he doesn't. Everyone's like, oh, he's not going to want to leave his last moment 6-0 at Wimbledon against Hurkacz. His body of work, there's so many memorable moments. I don't think over time that will go away. And I don't think people will harp on that and be like, oh my God, his last moment ever on a court was a 6-love third. So I just don't, personally, in my opinion, I think time will let that go. And I don't think that will be the lasting impression of Roger Federer at all. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree to that.
No, that's a good point. But I just want to add one thing to what Chris was talking about. I think that joy that he's describing in Federer as a performer, the actual act of going out and hitting tennis balls and playing to his heart's content, I think I think it's almost singular. I've never seen anything quite like it, Chris, in terms, I think with all the other great champions, they all love the sport, to be sure. And they love to compete and they love to win. But with him, it seems to go beyond that. And maybe that is why he feels like he's got to give it, squeeze it to the very, very end here and be satisfied on his terms. But I have not seen that in any male or female champion to the degree that he's exhibited.
And Steve, to add to your thoughts, he likes traveling with his family. It's not a hindrance. It doesn't bother him. He enjoys doing all that. So 100%.
That's the other point Chris is making. Absolutely. It's the lifestyle itself too. It's the whole package. And he's embraced it more comprehensively than anybody else I've seen.
Yeah.
But maybe guys too, he's tennis's Springsteen in a way. You think about it. He's gotten all that energy from the crowd everywhere he goes. Pretty much, he hasn't played too much in Serbia. I'm not sure he'd get there, but everywhere else, I mean, it's kind of like the beloved rock star making his journey around the world and playing his greatest hits for people. And I don't think he'd be happy with that in terms of the results all went south, but the results have been pretty good. an awful lot of good results into a late stage of his career, and he's got nothing but positive feedback from the crowds he's played in front of. So there is sort of a musical quality to his tennis anyway, and I think that's not a bad analogy in my mind. That sense that that sense of the performer beyond tennis who communes with those crowds like that. I'm not sure if there's an equivalent to that, Steve, over that long a period of time in tennis.
I don't think so. And I also don't think there's an equivalent to the way the crowds have embraced him from beginning to end of his career. Once I think back to the first Wimbledon in 2003, and from that point forward, I mean, he was on the map. And it didn't seem to matter whether it was the dominant phase from 2004 to 2007 or the difficult stretch of, say, 2010 and 11, when after he won the Australian in 2010, it was a long dry spell up to Wimbledon 2012. I think of all these stages of his career, the reemergence in 2017 and beating Rafa in the Australian Open final after the first knee surgery, all of these stages, didn't matter where he was in his career, he was beloved. And everywhere he went, Chris, everywhere. So you're right. Maybe Serbia would be the lone exception. But otherwise, that reverence was there, and it must have been. I'm sure it spoiled him in some ways. I don't think he took it for granted, but I think it's the only thing he knows. I mean, this is how it's been all along, and it's remarkable.
It really is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, to be honest with you, was to try to understand, even though it was clear what was going on, I kind of wanted to really understand for myself why, how, because I can't remember an equivalent of people not having a dip over basically you're talking about an 18-year period here now from 2003. And really he got on the map in 2001 when he beat Pete.
Right.
What about Chrissy? I know Steve has so much history with Chrissy. Chrissy was revered pretty well.
Yes, but when Chrissy I used to talk to her a lot about it in the 70s. When she was dominating, unlike Roger, the crowds often, even in the US, were rooting for her opponents, and it really stung. She wouldn't talk about on the record, but off the record, she was really disturbed by it because she felt like she was conducting herself well and she didn't understand it. And all she was trying to do was go out and win. And those crowds were pretty tough at times during this period of, say, 74 to 78, in the middle of all that, when she was number one in the world. And then it did change later when Martina surpassed her, and then the rivalry went back and forth. But I think I never sensed that with Roger in the dominant phase. He couldn't win enough for those fans, and that was everywhere he appeared, all over the globe.
Interesting. I know we're talking mostly about Roger here, obviously because of Chris and the great book that's out now. Again, it's a new book called The Master, The Long Run, Beautiful Game of Roger Federer, out in several languages. I want to switch topics before we end, just because both of you two are so passionate on it. And I think a lot of tennis fans are passionate on it. It's starting to get lost in the shuffle. There's a lot of confusion of format, where to watch it. I want to kind of pass the baton over to both of you. We're recording now at the end of the tennis season and the end of the calendar year of 2021. Davis Cup. So many good memories. And you guys, I mean, we could go for hours to talk about all the amazing matches and moments there were in Davis Cup history. It's losing some of its luster. I think we all agree with that, and that's sad. I want both of you guys have shared thoughts, whether it's been through me, whether it's been through social media. I want to talk, and we'll start with Chris, and then we'll throw it to Steve. What is your take on Davis Cup, and where do you think we can get it back up to, maybe not where it was at its peak, but back to where it appropriately should be within the history of the sport?
Yeah, it's a good, timely question. I mean, and my emotions on hearing it are kind of a mixture of sadness and some guilt, because I feel like I really lobbied for change with my column over time, because I felt like in the US it was just losing momentum, and it needed something to refresh it. But let me just say this: I'm in France right now. It's 2021, and there's been a series of great retrospectives over here, back to 1991 in the Davis Cup final, when France defeated the US with Yannick Noah as captain. Henri Lecomte and Guy Forget played the tennis of their lives to beat a Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi team with a very good doubles team of Fleck and Seguso in a wild arena in Lyon. I'll never forget. I was a pretty young journalist. I covered that, and I can still feel the ringing in my ears, and I can still get the cigarette smoke that was on top of the arena in my nostrils from being in that place. It was unforgettable. It's a top 5 experience for me in my career as an event that I covered. And frankly, a lot of those early Davis Cups that I saw in the 1990s are right up there for me in terms of events that I saw in the course of my career. And even in the 2000s, I went to Argentina when Spain upset Argentina and Del Potro and Albandi and Mar del Plata. Some fabulous moments. So you know what Davis Cup can be in person, in terms of the emotions. Frankly, it's unrivaled in terms of what it's been able to create over time. And you go back even further when it was one of the pillars of the game, and Steve goes back to those days. I mean, it really was something that shouldn't have needed saving. But yet, over time, I think the way the game was governed, the lack of agreement among the powers in the game beyond the International Tennis Federation, which owns the Davis Cup, created a loss of momentum. And ultimately, the way the schedule was constructed, looking at the times of Connors and Borg in particular, the players just stopped committing to it regularly once they got to a certain level. There were some guys who were exceptions, John McEnroe. You could call Novak Djokovic and Nadal exceptions in today's game. But really, this amazing period in men's tennis of the last 20 years, when we've had these fantastic historic rivalries, they haven't happened in Davis Cup. They just haven't. And it's ultimately, that's why I was calling for change. But where we are now with this hybrid model that's going on and finals in Madrid, I think takes it too far. And I think they should have tinkered instead of blowing it all up. It needs money. It needs funding. If it was an event that was run by the sport as a whole, it would be run very differently. I understand the ITF situation where they need the money and the revenue. It runs their entire organization in a lot of ways. But I do feel there's a risk of them losing all of it because of the way it's going right now. And it makes me very sad. And I do feel guilty because I did ask for change, but not this much change.
Steve, I'll let you add. I know this is a passionate topic of yours.
Having felt much the way Chris did, I don't want him to feel guilty because I think his heart was in the right place. And I think there should have been a way for it to carry this off, as Chris described. There could have been a different approach by the ITF. What disturbs me, what saddens me is, yes, the ATP Cup, they now have it, they slot it in at the beginning of the year before the Australian Open, and players have a lot of spirit there. And then the other event that came along that I think has in some ways been, I have very mixed feelings about it, is the Labor Cup, because the players love it. But to me, it's really a large scale exhibition, Team World versus Team Europe and shorter matches and the scoring system. And it's not the same thing. But what I'm getting at is the public confusion over all this. They see 3 team events now. The Davis Cup has gotten lost in the shuffle, and no matter what they did, if they'd stuck with the old schedule and home and away ties and spread it out throughout the year, or putting in one time frame as we did this year, they still are getting short shrift. And that bothers me, because to me, Davis Cup is the towering team event. And I go back with it even further than Chris. I'll never forget being in Bucharest in 1972, lucky enough to make that trip, living with my father in London at the time and going with the British press over there and watching Stan Smith almost single-handedly win the Davis Cup for the U.S. over Nastasi and Tiriac, and Smith winning 2 singles matches and a doubles. And it was astonishing. But I feel like even with what the criticisms that Chris is offering, which are totally valid, that in some ways Davis Cup has been victimized.
That's well said. I mean, I again, how it was, I mean, you basically knew, at least from a fan perspective, you knew it was 4 times a year. If you went through the finals, you knew when those dates were, you knew ESPN would cover it for the US. I mean, there was some consistency there. And now there's just so much confusion. I'm with you, and I'm a huge proponent of Labor Cup. I love Labor Cup. But I think Davis Cup still has its place, and hopefully moving forward, it can get back to, somewhere that's a good fit for both the players and the fans, because I think it's so good for the sport. With that, Chris and Steve, I mean, for me being here with 2 phenomenal writers, 2 phenomenal people who've covered the sport of tennis, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this conversation. To our listeners, it's holiday season right now. So 2 great books, 2 must-haves. Steve's latest book, Pete Sampras Greatness Revisited, and Chris's book, The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. get them because you're going to love them. I promise you that. And they're written by two amazing writers and two amazing individuals. Both of you guys, happy holidays, and wish you both much luck and professionally and personally in 2022.
Yes, you too, David. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Chris.
very, very touched by that. Thanks so much for that, and happy holidays to you.